All right, good afternoon, and thank you everyone for joining our discussion today around supply chain risk. This is obviously something that's very top of mind for folks, especially as you read the paper and you hear about things like NotPetya and SolarWinds. I'm honored today to have a panel from Clarendon, Bennett Woodward. Bennett, you want to give us a wave? Thanks for joining. From Rubric, I've got Jason Burrell. Jason, thanks for joining. And finally, from Varonis, I've got Stephen Fradlin. Stephen? Gentlemen, before we get started, I thought it'd be great if you could just take a moment to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your role, and then we can jump into the discussion. Jason, would you like to start?
Sure. So Jason Burrell, been a Rubrik about going on 6 years or so about now, focused on securing backup and recovery, yep, that's my role.
Thank you, Jason. Stephen?
My name is Stephen Fradlin. I'm the Director of Enablement here at Varonis. Been here about 5 years. I am I've been in the security industry about 10 years, a recovering virtual-holic. Used to do the VMware Citrixes of the world. Looking forward to the discussion today.
Thank you, Stephen. And Bennett?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. My name is Bennett Woodward. I'm VP of Global Sales at ClearedIn. I've been here for about 10 months now, after having reunited with the founder of the last company that I was at, Mobile Iron, Ajay Mishra, who is the CEO of ClearedIn.
Thank you, Bennett. And for everybody in the phone who I haven't met, my name is Peter Brookman. I help lead the CDI Security Solutions team. I'm honored to be here today. By way of background, I've spent a number of years as a practitioner and also had the fortunate opportunity to work with a number of security vendors. So I'm looking forward to our discussion today about supply chain risk. And to get things started, what I'd love to do is maybe kick things off with Bennett. Bennett, can you just give me your general thoughts on how you view the supply chain marketplace and the risks that are associated to it?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to, Peter, and thanks for inviting ClearedIn to participate today. And I think, the vantage point that ClearedIn sort of, views the whole supply chain risk is really kind of predicated on two driving forces. One is, your humans and your employees, continue to be the number one risk in the enterprise. You're only as good as your employees. And then two, the whole remote workforce, the work from home, kind of led to this aperture around communication to the supply chain that moved beyond email to things like Microsoft Teams, to things like Slack, to file sharing, to video solutions. And really, the way that ClearedIn is viewing this is from the prism of, where else besides email could this supply chain attack problem hit you, where maybe you haven't invested, maybe you've been turning a blind eye, or maybe you just don't have the adequate controls around. And so that's really ClearedIn's perspective, and what we're trying to help solve is by bringing a set of properties within an API-based solution to help companies audit trust relationships beyond email over to their collaboration channels.
Bennett, thank you for that feedback. And I think, when you talk about trust relationships, that's what this is all about. And first to recognize that you've got these relationships and these communication channels open, and ensure that you establish trust, because otherwise that's how we get into trouble. Jason, I'd like to ask a question of you. How do you view the supply chain marketplace?
Yeah, so from a Rubrik perspective, I mean, we're sitting in your last line of defense. So when it comes to us, it's again, we assume that something might happen at some point, and at that point we need to make sure that you can get back up and running as quickly as possible. As we see, we don't want disruptions in our supply chain. Obviously that has wide effects. So we our role in this as part of making sure our customers are able to get back as quick as possible and identify what copy to go back to and things like that. Also making sure it's a very secure copy. Again, anything that gets compromised, we don't want it to impact all the way through the backup perspective. It's really the only place you're going to be able to get back from.
Thank you, Jason. And Stephen, can you still hear us?
Yeah, I mean, to echo what Jason was saying, what we're seeing in Varonis right now is that it's pretty much not an if but when type of situation. And we've been starting to refer this as assumed breach. Just assume that you can have incidents like a supply chain attack or dark side or the different ones that we've seen recently, that if they do point their eyes towards you, you're probably going to be in a situation where they're going to get into your environment if they want to, and probably come in and try to access some data. So what we've been seeing with our incident response team and our forensic investigation teams with Varonis is we're seeing a lot of these behaviors where they're coming in and they're following a very similar pattern, be it if it's a supply chain or an attacker from the outside. And that's we're seeing them come in through some sort of external intrusion or through a supply side backdoor that's left for them to come in. They're moving around, elevating their privileges, accessing more higher privileged accounts, admin service accounts, and then of course no one breaks into the bank to steal the pens. They're after data, so they go after that information and try to exfiltrate it. And so what we've tried to do is give people a picture of what that path might look like and give them insights to when those types of behaviors happen, so hopefully they can step in and stop it before it gets too far.
The one thing that we know for sure is these events are going to happen, right? And preventing them holistically is just not a realistic strategy. And you've got to be able to create transparency first in understanding what your attack surface looks like, and then how things actually progress along your surface, so that you can protect yourself and catch them as fast as possible. So thank you everyone for the initial perspective. I wanted to bring up something that's very timely, because I know that Biden put out an executive order recently. As a matter of fact, I was reading about it this morning, and it pertains to the supply chain. And it's about developing criteria to evaluate the security practices developers and suppliers use themselves. As organizations that provide services and software and technology, how do you guys view that executive order? Where do you think it is going to, or how do you think it's going to progress over the next 6, 12, 18 months? Maybe to start, Stephen, would you like to kick things off?
Yeah, I mean, for me, first and foremost, it's great to see some leadership from government taking these issues seriously. It is obviously a big deal that affects. I mean, we've seen, even recently, is the Colonial Pipeline types of attacks that can have major effects on what happens in our world surrounding us. And I'm very appreciative to see the application and see us moving towards a zero trust model. One of the things that we've observed at Varonis is that zero trust is actually extraordinarily hard to implement, particularly with a lot of the, as Bennett mentioned earlier, a lot of the collaboration platforms, a lot of the remote work platforms is making this concept a lot more difficult. So I think we're going to see more and more companies needing guidance on how to apply those zero trust models onto their environments going forward. And in particular, this is something that's going to need to happen when it comes to stopping the types of supply chain attacks that we've been talking about. It's great that they have some basics in there, things like MFA, which is really, to me, kind of security 101, but we need to make sure that we're guiding our organizations further along the path than that.
And zero trust is something.
One thing
Oh, go ahead, keep
I'm
going.
sorry, Peter. One thing I wanted to add to what Stephen was saying that might be kind of topical is, we're seeing the same things, right, in terms of, people wanting to kind of really prepare for this and seeing this as a positive, kind of boost from leadership or from the government. But then it's also like, well, where do I start? And, from our perspective, supply chain attacks, especially for collaboration, is a bit of an invisible predator. And so the way that, a lot of our customers have been thinking about this is kind of related to the active sync phenomenon, where really, what happened back in 2009 is people were bringing, phones in, namely iPhone and Android to hook up the email, and it was unbeknownst to IT that those communications and those email conversations were happening. And it's sort of, rearing its head all over again, as it relates to collaboration. And so the way that we're kind of approaching this with our customers is really just starting from the vantage point of visibility. How do you get visibility so that you can then make, informed decisions about where people can and can't communicate with their collaborators, and not just shutting this thing down and taking them the shortcut of, well, I'm just going to have all my collaboration internally, but really kind of empowering people to, move towards using collaboration tools more in a zero trust framework.
Thanks, Bennett. Jason, what are your thoughts on the recent Biden initiative?
Yeah, I mean, I'll echo, the comments of Stephen and Beckett. It's very important that, some of these things get pushed along because, teams like this, we always want our customers to implement the best things, but, getting them, to do that is always, it's interesting, right? So, yeah, from our standpoint, zero trust, it matters a lot, and it goes past MFA. I think Stephen made a good point around privilege escalation. So like what happens when someone does have that admin account that's inside your environment? Like, can you trust? So like, we had to implement things like, retention locks. So even an admin can't delete or change the retention of a backup because they would just turn it to one day and then let the attack run. So it's like not even trusting your admin is not it's not something that people are used to doing, but it's something that kind of has to happen now. And it's good to see leadership saying, yeah, we can't even trust the person with access, even with MFA, to modify certain things. Like I wouldn't want, my bank modifying my records with just one person's access. Like I would expect that there's some sort of lock on that. So it is good seeing this, filter into all these products that, we want to help, enable them to turn this stuff on and make sure that they have, the proper protections in place so things can't be modified. Because it's just unrealistic to think you can just lock stuff in a box, throw a bunch of tape somewhere. It doesn't make any sense anymore. So this stuff's where, again, visibility is important, like Bennett's talking about. It's like, do you start with visibility, see where things are, and then, then you can start locking down the right areas. But, if you don't have any visibility to it, how do you even know where to start? So the same thing with like backup. It's like, you don't know what you're backing up, don't know where your sensitive data is, things like that. It's like, you got to start somewhere, get that visibility, and then know where to protect your critical assets.
It's interesting because, beyond visibility, then to me, you get to sort of a cultural change, right? And it's, as employees, especially today's, employee whose typical life cycle within a company is probably 3 to 5 years. You have to sort of treat them like they're outsiders from the get-go, right? And they need to understand that it doesn't mean that they don't have a relationship with the business. It's a way in which, it's actually just a way in which they protect themselves. And the business can help insulate, themselves from any potential threats that maybe aren't malicious, but just come from natively working remotely in manners of that capacity. So I think there's a lot of work to be done. I think the larger the organization, unfortunately, the harder it is to get there. But I think it's definitely the way to move forward. Jason, you brought up something interesting. We talked about transparency. One of the things that I hear about a lot in terms of recovery is, how confident are you in your recovery strategy, right? Call it your resilience strategy, or your tools that you're relying upon. From your vantage point, how do you, what would you recommend to a customer who's thinking about, recovery and backup and ensuring they can gain some confidence in that process?
Yeah, I think traditionally a lot of customers have built DR plans from a data center to data center perspective, but it shifted a lot recently where the new DR, from what we see, is all inside the area that you're in. You need to recover back quickly, and it's not a tornado, it's not a hurricane. It's these cyber events that are happening. So you have to be trained up. You have to build plans. You have to understand what you're recovering first, what you're recovering second. All those plans need to be in place. Like you could have the most robust backup platform in the world, but if you don't know what order to recover in, like those are things that you have to think about. And then automation obviously comes into play. Like if you're having to make those decisions and having to do too many decisions at a time of crisis, it's too much. So we always want to automate everything you can. So from an operator perspective, there's a button that can be pressed, and it can be pressed by multiple people. It is a process that's well defined and tested. And again, that means your backups have to be very performant in terms of the recovery side. A lot of times, the focus in the industry has been, can I compress this down to the smallest bit ever? And that's the win. It's like as small as I can get this data. Now it's kind of changing. It's like, well, how fast can I recover? It's not just legal issues, and it can be 3 weeks. It starts being 3 weeks, a month, especially in a supply chain. That's not acceptable. So testing recovery speed is something that people have to do, and they have to, again, work through those exercises. And it's more just than a product thing; it's a process, that has to be defined up front. You don't want to be like figuring out your process on the fly.
Thanks, Jason. And Stephen, I think about data like where, clients trying to figure out where their data is, how their data is moving, in and out of the organization, obviously, as it pertains to this discussion around supply chain.
Right.
And I come to a lot of examples where, I worked with Varonis on helping clients discover, right, what is going on right now with their data and not even recognizing that, oh my God, the data is it's pervasive and everything. What's your take on that?
Yeah,
How
absolutely. I mean,
effective-
yeah, what we discuss with our prospects and customers is understanding the blast radius of what happens when one of these types of supply chain attacks happens. A lot of times, you look at a recent example with SolarWinds where you had a vulnerability that sat there unutilized for a long period of time. So it's hard to know, it's hard to be able to catch and stop something like that when it happens. So you really have to understand what the impact is going to be. So we do analysis on data for our clients or prospects and customers to understand what would be accessible if someone does get a hold of a highly permissioned service account. What are they going to be able to access? Understanding what is normal data access, knowing exactly how often regular accounts, executives, service accounts, admin accounts, how often they're accessing and touching this data, having a profile of what's normal. So when you see deviation from that, you can very quickly see when it sticks out and have a chance to step in and try to stop it before it can really do any damage. So that's a big way how we're helping prepare our folks for what would happen with the supply chain attack.
Thanks, Stephen. And Bennett, I see you nodding over there. And I think about, alternative channels like Teams and Slack and how data, moves in and out of those types of channels. And right now it feels like a blind spot. But what from Claritin's perspective, I mean, how are you working with your customers to understand how data flows?
Yeah, no, thanks for asking, Peter. So, I mean, I think generally speaking, Claritin's sort of response to the supply chain social engineering attack surface is really that this problem is quickly moving beyond just email. I mean, if you look right now as to what Microsoft Teams is doing, Salesforce acquiring Slack, we are on the precipice of a disruption to email. The industry, and if you think about even what happened with COVID and the whole remote workforce, I don't even think that we've all been able to, properly assess what the long-term impact is this is going to be to supply chain. Most companies reacted, with just, hey, we got to open up cloud channels, we got to have VPN, we got to have VDI. But in terms of really putting in a long-term strategy for how to use collaboration, provide business opportunities to the supply chain, I don't even think we've arrived at that baseline yet. And so Claritin's sort of thesis and hypothesis is that, collaboration like Teams, like Slack, like file sharing, like Zoom are going to quickly become equal citizens to email in terms of correspondence to the supply chain. And so the answer there is, well, if that's true, and you believe that that's where the market is headed, are you securing your supply chain over collaboration like you are email? Most customers, they're not yet. And that's where Claritin would step in to help and partners to get people advanced along the cycle of security around supply chain.
And Jason, I see you nodding over there. And I think, I want to hear your perspective. And especially because I think we could all agree that millennials that are coming into the workforce, this is how they communicate. Right? This is what they were brought up on. Email is sort of stagnant and antiquated. So what are you thinking over there?
Yeah, I mean, when I was talking, I think I hear some feedback. So when I was nodding along because people also think when they go to Teams and start using a lot of cloud sources, they also think that it's completely resilient in the same way as well. So when you start collaborating and now you start everything's in Teams, and then someone deletes a Teams site or deletes a SharePoint site, they don't realize they can't get that back in the same way that they expect it, because it's replicated, it's available everywhere, but when that delete happens, it deletes everywhere. So like from Steven's perspective, someone gets creds to your cloud account and then can start deleting a team site or deleting SharePoint sites. Microsoft doesn't give you the recovery around that. So again, people are still new. They moved everything to Teams. They're busy getting their workforces going, and now supply chain, is impacted because people are sharing documents that way. And then if that disappears, there's, they didn't realize that like your cloud back, they explicitly say in the terms like we don't back it up. We provide redundancy, and that's where it stops. So we are seeing there's a learning curve that lags behind it that is taking some time for people to catch up. Like, oh wait, that needs to be secured differently. Oh wait, we do need to still like provide some sort of backup service around that, the cloud stuff, all the collaboration.
Yeah, if I could add to that too, one of the things that we're seeing too is that with the increase of collaboration, particularly in things like Microsoft Teams, and even beyond that, of course, with Slack and all the other Google Drive, any one of those that are used for collaboration, we've also greatly increased the complexity. It's hard to answer who could even delete a team site, right? It's hard to answer what data is in those repositories, what data could be shared, what data is shared, what data is critical to the organization that is being shared in an overly permissive way. That's definitely a problem that we've been working with a lot of our clients on, is trying to understand that. Going back to what we were talking about earlier with the zero trust model, is very difficult to apply that to collaboration platforms because it's a whole different level of permissions complexity that is different from anything that we're used to seeing before.
One of the most interesting projects I worked on was e-discovery, an e-discovery project for a client where they were trying to figure out, okay, if there was a suit put upon them and they were supposed to, come up with evidence, how do they actually, retrieve all that evidence across all these platforms? And it was quite difficult to figure out, right? And yet the responsibility still falls on your shoulders. So, so just Stephen, thinking about, Varonis and helping with the data discovery, marketplace on these channels. I mean, how is the company evolving into these channels, and what types of things can customers sort of anticipate from Varonis to help them?
Yeah, thanks for the question. In a big way, we've made very substantial improvements to automate our systems. A lot of what we had to deal with in the past is that we were able to help people identify where they had exposed data, both on-premise and in cloud-based platforms, collaboration platforms. We could find that data for them, but a lot of time it was a little bit of like, here, good luck. So we built a lot of automation into our systems now to automatically analyze behavior and remove that overexposure to that data. And that's something that we walk our clients through all the time about how they can actually fix this problem. And we've made a lot of improvements too with a lot of the data privacy regulations that have come out with, CMMC, GDPR, CCPA, and the many more. And hopefully, as we referred to earlier, I'm hoping to see some federal leadership on this when it comes to a, data protection privacy law that comes into place. We have built all of that into our system with a level of intelligence, because we know something like a social security number, unless it's actually a social security number for a person in California, doesn't actually qualify for CCPA. So we have to be able to see a social security number plus something like a California address or driver's license in order to validate it. And we built a lot of that automation into our system, so you don't need to do the work to iron those little bugs out, so to speak.
I think we could definitely all agree it's a pretty confusing market out there. Where it started with GDPR, then it's CCPA, you got NYDSF. I mean, it continues to evolve, and understanding what your data requirements are, responsibilities, that's beyond a full-time job. And Jason, thinking about sort of rubric and the fact that, vendor risk, and you brought up a good point. I think there's a false sense of security as to where the data is being stored. How are you collaborating with the sort of multi-cloud environment, open cloud environment, to help companies feel more confident in where their data is?
Yeah. So I mean, again, we're definitely going to do this from a SaaS-based perspective, so you can bring in not only your data center today and all the other cloud sources, because Yeah, the sprawl is pretty incredible out there. It's not one cloud provider. It's not just on-prem or cloud. It's always a mix that we see, and getting a handle around that is incredibly difficult. As more things come online, and like again, trying to get a picture that's broad enough. We obviously have to rapidly innovate and add all of that as quick as possible. So thankfully, we made a decision a while back to move to SaaS-based management. So all the cloud plugin things are quite easy, which is nice. But yeah, I mean, I think every company struggles, whether they have like 50 different AWS accounts they're trying to manage, or they're trying to deal with, again, the collaborations in Microsoft, their servers are in AWS. Like, how do I know if my data's safe? Like, we want to answer that question for our customers in one single place.
Thanks, Jason. And Bennett, coming back over to you, I know you deal with a lot of different scenarios around supply chain risk and data. Can you share maybe a few use cases that you've seen over the last few months that you think would resonate with the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the number one sort of use case that we're hearing time and time again is that Teams and Slack and file sharing are being used to do business and communicate to the outside supply chain, i.e. vendors, suppliers. And the question to really ask yourself is, when you receive that Slack Connect invitation from Bennett, who you've never met before, how do you know that's Bennett? There really isn't anything else to ask, right? I mean, if you don't clearly have a baseline of understanding of really having the context behind that request, I think you have your answer, right? There's a gap, there's a hole in sort of what you can do and impact in terms of security without having that context and visibility. Secondarily, one of the biggest, sort of attack vectors right now that we're seeing is phishing sites, bad actors, suspicious outsiders, using file sharing to mask the actual payload in terms of, this being a positive or a negative domain, and using that to just bypass an email gateway. So meaning, if Bennett is sending, OneDrive files out to, CDI, for example, but it's just hosting a phishing site, how would something have the context to say, hey, this is actually not a trustworthy, file sharing link. It's actually something that's redirecting to something nefarious. And that's where Cleared would step in. On top of that, around file sharing, people are sharing more things than they ever have. And of course, they're moving quickly. And so one of the permissions that Cleared helps provide some visibility and some remediation around is this idea of anonymous sharing. So when Bennett shares something to the outside world, do you want that file sitting out there anonymously, on the internet, in the abyss, where anyone who has access to the link can get to it? Or would you want to have something that provides more of a safety hub, and having, complete transparency into the relationship of who that outside recipient is, and do they actually, merit the trust of receiving that link? So those are things, in terms of use cases, Peter, that we're really, spending a lot of our time helping our customers with.
Thank you, Bennett. And I know we've only got about 2 minutes left, but I just, Stephen and Jason, I'd like to give you guys just a few minutes to kind of just say a few last words about supply chain. Stephen?
Yeah, just to go very quickly, one of the things that we encourage you to do is reach out to Varonis and let us help you do an assessment of what the impact would be in a supply chain attack. We can take a look across all of your directory structure environments, across all of your data, figure out where those critical assets are, where they might be exposed, and give you a plan to repair that, as well as a methodology to monitor it and see if something were to go wrong or something were to happen. And that's something that we do free of charge for our customers. So, and of course we do with partners like CDI.
Thank you, Stephen. Jason?
Yeah, so I mean, just again, yeah, reach out to Rubrik if you don't understand if your data security, you can get back quickly. Again, it's a question that you should ask yourself is like, can a rogue admin that gets that gets compromised, can they delete your backups? Is there any sort of thing that you can do to protect yourself? If you don't know the answer to that, like, we're happy to obviously help and make sure that you're secured. Again, we have to assume compromise at this time, so want to make sure you're safe.
Just to conclude, I want to just say one more thing, and I think the key here
the key word is collaboration, right? We have to work together. We each have dependencies on one another that we're either aware of or unaware of. Part of collaboration is exactly what we're doing here today, which is talking with the professionals we have in the room. So I want to thank you very much on behalf of CDI Security. I appreciate your time and all the kind words that you've shared and advice to the audience. And I hope the audience will reach out to each of you individually and find out more about how you can help them with supply chain risk. So thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
for having us, Peter.
Pleasure.